Let me fix that real quick. Alright, welcome back to the Blow Up Your channel here. In this video, if you can't tell by the thumbnail, which should say Genesis chapter 4, we will be talking about Genesis chapter 4 today. And reading it, because that's how I do it. I read it first and then we discuss it. Or I discuss it. Y'all can't really talk back because that's not how these videos work. But yeah, and if you haven't seen any of these other ones, like in the previous ones, I will read Genesis, the chapter, and then offer my perspective on the scripture there. And I do read from the NIV version of the Bible. So yeah, with that being said, why don't we just jump straight on into this Genesis chapter 4 here. So, Genesis chapter 4, verse 1. Adam made love to his wife Eve, and she became pregnant and gave birth to Cain. She said, "With the help of the Lord, I have brought forth a man." Later, she gave birth to his brother Abel. Now Abel kept flocks and Cain worked the soil. In the course of time, Cain brought some of the fruits of the soil as an offering to the Lord, and Abel also brought an offering, fat portions from some of the firstborn of his flock. The Lord looked with favor on Abel and his offering, but on Cain and his offering he did not look with favor. So Cain was very angry, and his face was downcast. Then the Lord said to Cain, "Why are you angry? Why is your face downcast? If you do what is right, will you not be accepted? But if you do not do what is right, sin is crouching at your door. It desires to have you, but you must rule over it." Now Cain said to his brother Abel, Let's go out to the field." While they were in the field, Cain attacked his brother Abel and killed him. Then the Lord said to Cain, "Where is your brother Abel?" "I don't know," he replied. "Am I my brother's keeper?" The Lord said, "What have you done? Listen, your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground. Now you are under a curse and driven from the ground, which opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. When you work the ground, it will no longer yield its crops for you. You will be a restless wanderer on the earth." Cain said to the Lord, "My punishment is more than I can bear. Today you are driving me from the land, and I will be hidden from your presence. I will be a restless wanderer on the earth, and whosoever finds me will kill me." But the Lord said to him, "Not so. Anyone who kills Cain will suffer vengeance 7 times over." Then the Lord put a mark on Cain so that no one who found him would kill him. So Cain went out from the Lord's presence and lived in the land of Nod, east of Eden. Cain made love to his wife, and she became pregnant and gave birth to Enoch. Cain was then building a city, and he named it after his son Enoch. To Enoch was born Irad, and Irad was the father of I assume this is similar to Michael, right? It's Mehuel, and Mehuel was the father of Methushel, and Methushel was the father of Lamech. See, that one's easy to pronounce right there. Lamech married 2 women, one named Ada and the other Zillah. It's Godzilla. That's what I think whenever I hear that. Ada gave birth to Jabal. He was the father of those who live in tents and raise livestock. His brother's name was Jubal. He was the father of all who play stringed instruments and pipes. Zillah also had a son, Tubal-Cain, who forged all kinds of tools out of bronze and iron. Tubal-Cain's sister was Naamah. Lamech said to his wives, Ada and Zillah, "Listen to me, wives of Lamech, hear my words. I have killed a man for wounding me, a young man for injuring me. If Cain is avenged 7 times, then Lamech 77 times." Now that's still Lamech speaking, by the way, just to be clear. This is not anymore. Adam made love to his wife again, and she gave birth to a son and named him Seth, saying, "God has granted me another child in place of Abel, since Cain killed him." Seth also had a son and named him Enosh. At that time, people began to call on the name of the Lord. And that's the end of Genesis chapter 4, right there. Which, I understand, that latter half of Genesis chapter 4 is like almost entirely just lineage of what's happened, which, if you're like me, can be quite boring, especially whenever you don't know how to pronounce their names. Because that's the hard part, honestly. You look at that and you're like, what? How do you say that? I don't understand. But yeah. Anyways, also in this one, not much I can do in terms of like actually offering like scientific evidence that proves this stuff, because again, it's mainly about things that aren't going to really be around anymore. So because this happened a little ways back. So there's that. But anyways, what I think is the most interesting takeaway from this chapter is that we kind of see the same crime being like committed, and I mean same crime or like sin, I guess, because we see the taking of life twice in this chapter. First with Cain, and then second with Lamech, which is a descendant of Cain, but that's not really the point there. But they kill for completely different reasons, right? Because Cain kills because he is angry and jealous of Abel, his brother, and that's why he kills Abel, out of hatred for him, right? Whereas Lamech, he doesn't kill the young man because he hates the young man, but he kills that guy because he attacked him first and hurt him, and he was in fear for his own life, so he killed him in return, in self-defense, really. And then also, an interesting tidbit that I noticed there is that whenever Cain killed Abel, it was like God basically directly punished Cain for that crime, and said that, yeah, the ground's no longer going to give you crops, and you're going to have to go wander the earth, basically. You can't live here in Eden anymore. Which I know that, so Adam and Eve are out of the garden now because they got banished from the garden, and they're not allowed into the garden. But I guess the area around there is still called Eden, which makes sense because, you know, that's the garden, right? So it's the Garden of Eden. So it makes sense that outside is Eden. So, anyways, that was a little bit of a tangent there. But yeah, so Cain is basically banished, and he goes to Nod, and then is starting to build his own thing. It also never mentions, at least in this chapter, that Adam and Eve had like daughters, but like that's the only logical conclusion because Cain had a wife, right? So it only makes sense that they also have to come from Adam and Eve, right? So it only makes sense, you know, that way. But like that's never really mentioned. It just says that Cain slept with his wife and then she gave birth to what's their name? Hold on, let me find it. Yeah, made love to his wife, and she became pregnant, gave birth to Enoch, right? And then you go through all that stuff until eventually you land on Lamech, who, again, also killed somebody, but in self-defense. And then with that, because God directly punishes Cain, and then he marks Cain and says that whoever kills you will be like have vengeance for 7 times, right? But and then later when Lamech does it, this like punishment doesn't really come from God, but I assume from Lamech's own guilt, is that if Cain is avenged 7 times, then Lamech 77 times is what it says. Right there. But I don't know if that's necessarily coming from God. Also, I don't know why Lamech is speaking in like the third person here, but he is. Because he says, Ada and Zillah, listen to me, wives of Lamech, hear my words. So like, I mean, that's like a kind of like a title, wives of Lamech, right? But then down here he says, if Cain, this is still him talking, it says, if Cain is avenged 7 times, then Lamech 77 times. It's just weird. Anyways, back to what I was saying. But yeah, that's Lamech speaking, not God. So it's just interesting because like God doesn't really, he never really, I mean, murder is still kind of is like still sin, but it was in self-defense, right? So I don't really know the logistics of that. Is what I'm saying, I guess. All I'm pointing out really is that it wasn't God himself that said that Lamech shall be like 77 times, right? That was Lamech saying that. Anyways, then we get to the end of the chapter and we see that Adam and Eve have a third son, Seth, and then we see Seth has a son which is Enosh, and then they call him the Lord. Is whenever at that time people began to call him the Lord, the name of the Lord, right? So, and then I also do actually have another thing, which is earlier in the chapter here, where we actually start seeing the consequences of like Adam and Eve being kicked out of the garden, because now they have to tend to the soil and stuff. Because we see that with Cain, because it says Abel worked the flocks of animals, and then Cain worked the soil for both for food, presumably. Since they're no longer allowed in the garden, they can't just harvest that; they actually have to work for it. And then, actually, not too long ago, my pastor at church, we recently talked a little bit about Genesis chapter 4 here, at least the earlier parts, where talking about the offerings of that Abel gave to God and that Cain gave to God, and basically, because we saw that Abel's offering was more favored to God, to the Lord, and he basically, my pastor said, like kind of why that is because Abel offered like the first like fruits of his flock, like the very first things that he got from his flock he offered to God, whereas Cain didn't do that. He did not offer the first like product that he had to God. He kept that and then just picked some other fruits and offered that to God. And the reason why Cain wasn't favored but Abel was is because then in Proverbs 3 verses 9 and 10 it says, honor the Lord with your wealth, with the first fruits of all your crops. Then your barns will be filled to overflowing, and your vats will brim over with new wine. Right? And it says first fruits. It doesn't say wait until more fruits grow and then offer those to God. It says the very first fruits of all your crops. Now this is specifically talking about crops, but I think it applies to other products and stuff as well. I think it means more of like the fruits of your labor. So if you offer first the fruits of your labor to God, what your fruit has given you, right? You offer that to God, and then you will be blessed, right? then your barns will be filled to overflowing and your vats will brim over with new wine, right? But whereas Cain did not do that. Abel did. Abel offered his first fruits. Cain did not offer his first fruits. And that's why God favored Abel's offering to Cain's offering there, which then also made Cain jealous and angry and hateful towards his brother, and why he killed him, right? So, anyways, that's basically all I have to say on Genesis chapter 4 there. Obviously, moral of the story, don't kill people. Then, right? So yeah, if you enjoyed that video, then please do leave a like, because I'm fairly certain that is what YouTube uses to then send to other people. And if you're seeing this and you aren't subscribed, then by all means please subscribe. But yeah, other than that, I will see you in the next one.